Ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about the history of punk rock, one name rises above all others: Johnny Rotten, the sneering, venom-spitting voice of the Sex Pistols. He wasn't just a frontman. He was an anti-establishment prophet, a cultural lightning rod who turned music into a weapon. His snarling delivery in Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen didn't just shake the industry. It burned down the old house of rock and roll and built a new, chaotic foundation. But with genius came fury. Rotten had no patience for hypocrisy, fakery, or what he saw as musical sellouts. He valued authentic rebellion over commercial comfort, and he didn't hesitate to declare war on icons, even the biggest names in rock and pop. To him, it wasn't personal fame that mattered, but the fight for truth in music. Tonight, we're diving into 6 of his most infamous rivalries. 6 musicians and bands who felt the sting of Rotten's uncompromising punk fury. Some were cultural giants like Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney. Others were flamboyant icons like David Bowie and Elton John. And finally, one was his own bandmate, Sid Vicious, whose tragic downfall became the most heartbreaking betrayal of all. So buckle up. This isn't just a story about music. It's about rebellion, authenticity, betrayal, and the cost of speaking the truth too loudly.
6. Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones. Rotten's first major target was Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, the so-called kings of rock and roll. By the late 1970s, the Stones were still selling out arenas, still dancing across stages, still pretending to be dangerous rebels. But Johnny Rotten wasn't fooled. To him, the Stones represented everything punk despised. Wealthy, aging rockers clinging to their image while cashing in on nostalgia. Rotten sneered that Jagger was nothing more than a pensioner in leather pants, desperately trying to look young while living the life of luxury. Witnesses recall Rotten mocking Jagger at a London club, shouting, "Look at Grandad counting his pension money while pretending to be wild." For Rotten, the Stones were no longer rebels. They were museum pieces, selling audiences a safe, sanitized version of rebellion. This feud wasn't just personal, it was generational. Punk rock wasn't born to entertain. It was born to shock, challenge, and destroy the old order. And in Rotten's eyes, the Stones weren't dangerous anymore. They were just another part of the establishment.
5. David Bowie. Next on Rotten's hit list was David Bowie, the chameleon of rock. Bowie was celebrated for his reinventions: Ziggy Stardust, The Thin White Duke, Aladdin Sane. Critics loved his theatrics. Fans adored his transformations. But Rotten saw something different. To him, Bowie wasn't an artist. He was an actor, a privileged performer hiding behind makeup and costumes. Rotten mocked Bowie's personas, calling them art school dress-up, designed to impress intellectuals rather than connect with real people. Authentic artists don't need masks, Rotten spat in an interview. Real power comes from your own face, your own truth, not from playing aliens and dressing up for professors. This feud cut to the heart of punk philosophy. For Bowie, reinvention was art. For Rotten, it was fakery. Punk wasn't about spectacle. It was about raw honesty, even if that honesty was ugly and uncomfortable. And yet, Bowie remained untouched by Rotten's insults. He admired punk's energy and even integrated elements of it into his own music.
But for Johnny Rotten, Bowie's success proved how much the press preferred style over substance.
4. Rod Stewart. The third feud was aimed at Rod Stewart, the raspy-voiced rocker who once sang about the struggles of working-class Britain. At first glance, Stewart seemed like an ally. He came from modest roots, he had the street-smart voice, and he sang about the hardships of ordinary life. But to Johnny Rotten, Rod Stewart was a sellout. By the late 70s, Stewart wasn't a working-class hero anymore. He was living in mansions, dating supermodels, and buying football teams. Yet, he still claimed to sing for the people. Rotten wasn't having it. He accused Stewart of poverty tourism, selling audiences a fake connection to struggles he no longer experienced. Real working-class heroes don't fly yachts to the Caribbean, Rotten scoffed. At a Manchester venue, Rotten openly mocked Stewart's credibility, yelling, "Stop singing about the streets when your only problem is which suit to wear on your yacht." This feud exposed Rotten's deepest value, authenticity. To him, Stewart represented the danger of forgetting where you came from. Punk wasn't about riches. It was about staying true to the people who raised you.
3. Elton John. If Rod Stewart was guilty of selling out his roots, Elton John was guilty of something worse, turning rock into pure spectacle. By the mid-1970s, Elton John was a global superstar. He wore feathers, sequins, and oversized glasses. His concerts were dazzling shows filled with fireworks and costumes. But to Johnny Rotten, all of that glitter was just a circus hiding weak messages. Elton's a Vegas showman, Rotten declared. He's forgotten that music should challenge people, not entertain their grandmothers. To Rotten, Elton represented the commercialization of rebellion. Instead of making audiences think, he was helping them escape into fantasy. And for punk, a movement built on confrontation, escapism was the ultimate sin. Witnesses say Rotten once laughed at Elton on TV, calling him a clown in feathers pretending to be dangerous. It was brutal, but it summed up the punk worldview. Rebellion should unsettle the powerful, not comfort the comfortable.
2. Paul McCartney and the Beatles. Perhaps Rotten's boldest attack was on Paul McCartney and the Beatles, the most beloved band in history. To Britain, the Beatles were untouchable legends, cultural gods. But to Rotten, they were the prison guards of nostalgia. He mocked McCartney as a has-been merchant selling yesterday's dreams to people too scared to face today's problems. To him, the Beatles represented the false hope of the 1960s, peace, love, flower power, ideas that never solved anything. Rotten believed their worship was preventing Britain from moving forward. Yesterday's heroes are today's problems, he said, dismissing the Beatles' legacy as poisonous nostalgia. This wasn't just arrogance, it was punk's mission statement. Punk wanted to burn down the myth of the 1960s and replace it with harsh realism. For Rotten, McCartney wasn't an idol, he was a roadblock.
1. Sid Vicious. And finally, the most tragic feud of all. Sid Vicious, Rotten's own bandmate in the Sex Pistols. When Sid joined the Pistols, he embodied the punk image. Spiky hair, sneer, violence. But Rotten saw the danger immediately. Sid wasn't about music. He was about chaos, drugs, and destruction. Rotten confided that Sid was a walking cartoon who thought being punk meant being stupid. And as Sid's addiction worsened, his self-destruction began to overshadow the band's message.
The ultimate betrayal came when Sid's violent behavior and tragic downfall turned the Sex Pistols into a revolutionary band into a cautionary tale. Rotten wasn't just angry, he was heartbroken. Sid had turned punk rebellion into a car crash, a parody of everything they stood for.